Hello there. Welcome back to Midnight Ocean. I'm Velen, your guide to traveling through the wonders of the ocean. Tonight, we're going to explore some species of marine animals that are extinct. If these cozy moments calm you, I invite you to subscribe, share a comment, or leave a like. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath. Don't be afraid, you're safe here. Let's dive deep into the sea and let our imagination guide us to a peaceful and deep night. In July 1862, German naturalist Eduard von Martens bought a stingray at a fish market in Jakarta, Indonesia. It was a female, measured 33 centimeters, about the size of a dinner plate, and belonged to a species no one had ever described before. Martens named it Urolophus javanicus, the Java stingaree. It was never recorded again after 1862 and may have already been extremely rare when Martens bought it. In December 2023, scientists declared the species extinct following an extensive assessment for the IUCN Red List, the first confirmed extinction of a marine fish as a result of human activity. Intensive and largely unregulated fishing is likely the main threat that led to the population's collapse, with coastal fish catches in the Java Sea already declining as far back as the 1870s. The only physical evidence that this species ever existed is the specimen Martens bought at that market, preserved in a museum in Berlin. A stingaree belongs to the family Urolophidae. Picture a flattened disc of flesh, the animal's entire body, attached to a thin tail ending in a venomous spine. That disc works like an underwater wing. Undulating muscles along the edges propel the animal across sandy bottoms in smooth, continuous motion. The eyes sit on the dorsal side, facing upward, scanning the water column. The mouth is on the underside, facing the sediment, capturing buried invertebrates. Urolophus javanicus had a 33-centimeter disc, smaller than many species in the same genus, adapted to the shallow coastal waters of the Java Sea. The Java Sea is a shallow sea, rarely exceeding 50 meters in depth, between the islands of Java, Borneo, and Sumatra. That wide continental shelf concentrated dense fishing fleets running bottom trawls that swept the substrate systematically. Picture a net dragged along the seafloor like a broom across a floor. It catches the commercial target and every organism living on that bottom. Benthic species like stingrays, which live on or near the sediment, get swept up indiscriminately. The net makes no distinction between the marketable fish and the accidental bycatch. Both end up on the boat together. The IUCN Red List is the most comprehensive global inventory of the conservation status of species. Each assessment requires a rigorous review of historical records, population data, and threat analysis. A species is declared extinct only after exhaustive surveys in known habitats over appropriate time periods yield no records whatsoever. For you, Javanicus, no specimen has been found in over 160 years of searching, including intensive scientific surveys in recent decades. The accumulated absence of evidence across generations constitutes, methodologically, proof of extinction. Coastal fishing in the Java Sea was already showing signs of collapse in the decades immediately following Martens' purchase. Dutch colonial records document a progressive decline in catches between 1870 and 1900. The pressure was not new. Local fishing communities had been operating for centuries, but technological intensification and population growth accelerated extraction far beyond the replenishment capacity of slow-maturing species. Think of it this way. If a population takes years to replace each individual lost, and fishing removes hundreds per season, collapse is a matter of arithmetic, not bad luck. Stingrays in the genus Urolophus reproduce viviparously. Females don't lay eggs. They carry live young internally. Litter sizes are small, typically 1 to 4 pups. Long reproductive cycles and low fecundity make any population of these species inherently fragile in the face of overfishing. When fishing mortality exceeds the natural replenishment rate, the population curve declines with no mechanism for rapid recovery. Every adult female removed represents years of reproductive potential wiped out. Not just that individual, but all the offspring she would ever have produced. The Berlin specimen is held at the Museum für Naturkunde, the Natural History Museum of Berlin. Natural history collections function as permanent biological archives. They preserve morphology, extractable DNA, associated parasites, and isotopic signatures that reveal diet and habitat. For you, Javanicus, that single specimen is the entirety of the species' material record. Future genomic analyses may yet extract information about genetic diversity. In a sense, the extinction was certified before the species had even been genetically characterized, something that would be unthinkable for widely studied mammals or birds. Its confirmation as the first marine fish extinction caused by human activity sets this case apart from previous freshwater extinctions, which have historically been more common. Marine environments offer greater connectivity between populations. Currents carry larvae, individuals migrate between regions, making marine extinctions less likely compared to species confined to isolated lakes or rivers. That Javanicus reached extinction in an open sea reflects the exceptional intensity of fishing pressure in the region, not a natural phenomenon, but a direct and measurable consequence of specific human economic decisions. No photographs, no video, no behavioral studies exist. What Javanicus preferred to eat, how it courted, what parasites it carried, how long it lived, none of it is known. The complete biology of an entire species was erased before it was ever recorded. That silence is qualitatively different from the silence of species lost to geological events in the distant past. Here, humans were present, instruments were available, and the opportunity to document existed. There simply was no awareness, yet that it would ever be necessary. The case highlights a structural flaw in environmental protection systems. Species are declared threatened or extinct after the damage is already irreversible. The 2023 assessment relied on accumulated absence of records spanning decades, negative evidence. Proactive monitoring systems capable of detecting declines before collapse exist for very few marine species. The Jakarta market where martins bought the ray is still active today, transformed and industrialized. The Java Sea is still intensively fished. Every time bottom trawls sweep that sandy substrate, undescribed species may be caught and discarded without record, and the fate of Javanicus may be repeating itself in slow motion, with no naturalist present to notice. From the Indo-Pacific to the North Atlantic, the modern extinction of marine mammals followed a common pattern. Intense hunting before any scientific inventory even existed. The Japanese sea lion, Xalophus japonicus*, inhabited the coasts of Japan, Korea, and the Sea of Japan. It was hunted for its oil and its whiskers, the vibrissae, used in traditional Chinese medicine. Its population was already collapsing in the early 20th century due to extensive hunting, and the last confirmed sighting dates to 1974. The last individual recorded with certainty was a male captured in Japan that year. The species was declared extinct by the IUCN in 1994. Its extinction occurred before researchers had documented its behavior, feeding range, or any population data, gone before it was ever understood. Xalophus japonicus belonged to the family Otaridae, the eared seals, or sea lions with visible external ears. The main difference from true seals is in the hind flippers. Otariids can rotate them downward and use them as legs, moving on land in a quadrupedal gait. Adult males develop a characteristic neck mane and are substantially larger than females. Picture the size difference between a lion and a lioness applied to marine animals. The closest living relative, Zalaphus californianus, inhabits the North American Pacific coast and can reach 2 meters and 300 kilograms in males. The oil rendered from subcutaneous fat was the primary product of the hunt. This layer of adipose tissue is thick in marine mammals. It serves as thermal insulation against cold water and an energy reserve during reproductive fasting periods. It is highly caloric and rich in long-chain fatty acids. In the 19th century, before kerosene and mineral oils became widely available, marine mammal fat lubricated industrial machinery, fueled oil lamps, and waterproofed leather. A single adult sea lion carcass could yield dozens of liters, enough economic value to motivate systematic, repeated hunting campaigns at the same colonies. The vibrissae, the whiskers, of marine mammals function as sophisticated sensory organs, not simple facial hairs. Each vibrissa is innervated by thousands of nerve endings that detect pressure variations in the water with remarkable precision, allowing the animal to track the hydrodynamic wake left by a fleeing fish even in total darkness. In Zalaphus japonicus, the vibrissae were long and dense. Traditional Chinese medicine incorporated parts of marine animals into therapeutic formulations. Demand was continuous and unregulated, feeding the coastal hunting market regardless of the actual state of populations. The population collapse was accelerated in the early 20th century by an additional factor. Fishermen began killing sea lions as predator control. These animals consume fish, cephalopods, and crustaceans, the same resources competed for by coastal fisheries. Where animal protein is scarce and fishing is subsistence, the presence of efficient predators is seen as direct economic competition. Picture sharing a limited income source with hundreds of animals consuming dozens of kilograms of fish per day. The logic of elimination, as ecologically destructive as it is, was understandable from the local perspective of the time. World War II and the subsequent industrial expansion of Japanese and Korean fisheries intensified pressure on coastal habitats even further. Larger vessels, more durable nylon nets, and more powerful engines allowed fishermen to reach remote islands and reefs that had previously functioned as natural refuges for colonies. Lioncourt Rocks, today disputed between Japan and Korea as Dokdo and Takashima, was possibly the last stronghold of Z. japonicus colonies. The male captured in 1974 was likely one of the few remaining individuals from a population already fragmented below the threshold of viability. Marine mammal populations need minimum density to sustain reproductive behaviors. Otariid species are polygynous. Dominant males control groups of females during the breeding season at rookeries, fixed land-based breeding sites, usually rocky beaches or islands. When density falls below a critical threshold, males cannot find enough females, young females cannot find viable mates, and reproductive recruitment collapses. The population declines not only through direct mortality, it declines through the absence of replenishment. It is extinction by aging and progressive isolation, silent and inevitable once that threshold is crossed. No systematic study was ever conducted on *Z. Japonicus *, while the species still existed in observable numbers. The decades from the 1920s through the 1960s, when colonies could still be found, produced no fieldwork documenting group size, foraging areas, seasonal migration patterns, or parental care behavior. The scientific record consists of specimens in museum collections, bones at archaeological sites, and anecdotal accounts from fishermen. The biology of the species remains unknown in its most fundamental aspects, a gap that no future technology can fill because behavior does not fossilize. Comparison with Zalaphus californianus, the California sea lion, abundant and intensively studied, suggests what was lost. The Californian exhibits long-distance navigation, complex vocal communication with individually recognizable repertoires, social learning, and unihemispheric sleep. Half the brain sleeps while the other half keeps the animal moving. If Z. japonicus shared these capabilities, as its phylogenetic proximity suggests, then the extinction did not erase just a species. It erased an entire set of cognitive and social behaviors that will never be observed or compared. The IUCN's official declaration of extinction in 1994 came 20 years after the last record, an interval that reflects legitimate scientific caution. Marine species are difficult to monitor. Absence of sightings does not immediately equal extinction. For 2 decades, researchers surveyed islands, interviewed fishermen, and analyzed incidental bycatch records. No evidence of survival emerged. The Sea of Japan remains one of the most intensively fished seas on the planet, and the coastlines that were once habitat for sea lion colonies are today occupied by ports and industrial infrastructure. Even if preserved genetic material someday allowed cloning, no functioning ecosystem capable of receiving a reintroduced population would remain. In the Caribbean, another marine mammal extinction followed the same accelerated trajectory. The Caribbean monk seal, Neomonicus tropicalis *, was the only seal native to tropical America. The species was last seen in 1952 at a colony on Serenilla Bank between Jamaica and Honduras. The IUCN declared it extinct in 2008, making it the first confirmed extinction of a seal in modern times. Hunting was the primary cause. European colonizers had been slaughtering the seals in large numbers since the 16th century, both for their meat and fat, and because they were seen as competitors to fishermen. Columbus recorded the killing of 8 seals during his second voyage to the Caribbean in 1494. The documented beginning of a process that took 4.5 centuries to complete the extinction. The Caribbean monk seal belonged to the family Phocidae, the true seals, with no visible external ears. Unlike otariids such as Z. japonicus, true seals cannot rotate their hind flippers downward. They move on land in an undulating motion using their abdomen like a slow, heavy caterpillar. Neomonicus tropicalis inhabited shallow tropical beaches, coral reefs, and submerged sandbars throughout the Caribbean. The only seal in the world entirely adapted to an equatorial climate in the Western Hemisphere. That unique ecological niche, with no equivalent in any other species, disappeared along with it. Columbus described the seals as sea wolves during his second voyage in 1494. The immediate killing of 8 individuals recorded in his journal was no isolated incident. It reflected the generalized attitude of European colonizers toward abundant marine fauna with no prior experience of human predators. Seals that had never been hunted showed no flight response in the presence of humans, behavior the Europeans interpreted as stupidity or docility, but which was simply the absence of learned anti-predator behavior. This made killing them trivially easy. One man with a club could slaughter dozens on a single beach, with no effort or risk. Monk seal fat was used for multiple practical purposes. It lubricated the gears of sugarcane mills and sugar presses, which became the economic backbone of the colonial Caribbean. It lit the work facilities used for nighttime labor on plantations. It waterproofed the ropes and sails of ships. That concrete utilitarian value ensured that the hunting was active and deliberate, not merely incidental. On each newly colonized island, the same sequence repeated. Europeans arrived, found seal colonies, exploited them intensively for a few years or decades, and the species locally disappeared before any form of control was ever considered. The Caribbean is a sea of exceptionally concentrated biodiversity. Coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass beds, and shallow banks make up habitat for a remarkable density of species. Neomonicus tropicalis occupied the top of the local food chain, consuming reef fish, lobsters, and cephalopods. Removing a top predator alters the entire trophic structure below it, a phenomenon known as a trophic cascade. Without the seal regulating the populations of its prey, the species balance of the reef shifts. The extinction of N. tropicalis was not merely the loss of an animal. It was the removal of an ecological function that no remaining species in the Caribbean performs. The only living relative of N. tropicalis in the Western Hemisphere is the Hawaiian monk seal, Neomonicus shawnslandi*, a critically endangered species with fewer than 1,500 individuals. In the Mediterranean monk seal, *Monicus*, is also in critical condition, with fewer than 700 individuals. The Caribbean extinction completes a pattern of collapse across the genus Neomonicus and Monicus globally. Every monk seal in the world is either extinct or on the brink, all through the same mechanism. Intense historical hunting followed by habitat disruption from human coastal activity. The last sightings of N. tropicalis in the 20th century were progressively rarer and geographically more restricted. Saranilla Bank, a submerged reef far from the main islands and shipping routes, was precisely the kind of remote location where the last remnants of overburdened species tend to persist. Far enough to escape immediate pressure, but not populous enough to maintain reproductive viability. The colony observed in 1952 was not continuously monitored. When researchers returned in subsequent decades, they found nothing. The disappearance was not witnessed. It was simply noted in retrospect. The 2008 declaration of extinction was preceded by an intensive search coordinated by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which surveyed banks, reefs, and remote Caribbean islands between 1999 and 2007. Interviews with hundreds of fishermen confirmed that no credible sighting had occurred in decades. The search was simultaneously a scientific protocol and a formalized act of mourning. The exhaustive documentation of absence as proof of irreversible extinction. The final report concluded that the species was extinct with a high degree of certainty, scientific language for what in everyday terms means. It no longer exists. Columbus' record from 1494 marks the documented beginning of an extinction process that lasted 458 years. That span is long enough to encompass the rise and fall of colonial empires, the Industrial Revolution, the emergence of conservation biology as a scientific discipline, and the first international conventions for marine wildlife protection. And still was not enough to save the species. The hunting of the first centuries destroyed the biomass. The habitat disruption of the following centuries prevented any recovery. And by the time legal instruments of protection finally existed, the population was already below the threshold of viability. No live specimen of N. tropicalis was ever kept in captivity. No vocalization recording exists. Monk seals are known for complex acoustic communication, but the Caribbean species' vocal repertoire remains entirely unknown. Bones at pre-Columbian archaeological sites suggest that indigenous populations coexisted with the species for millennia without causing its collapse, which implies that sustainable hunting was technically possible, and that the destructive intensity was introduced with European colonization, not an inevitable consequence of human presence. That distinction does not reverse the extinction, but it locates its cause with unusual historical precision. The fastest extinction of a large marine mammal in recorded history belongs to Steller's sea cow, Hydrodamalis gigas*. It was the largest sirenian that ever lived, reaching up to 7.9 meters in length and 8 to 10 tons. It inhabited the shallow, cold waters around the Commander Islands in the North Pacific, feeding exclusively on algae. The naturalist George Wilhelm Steller first described it in 1741 during Vitus Bering's expedition. The species was extinct by 1768, just 27 years after its discovery by Europeans. hunted for its meat and fat by fur traders and explorers. No teeth, no ability to dive, slow, trusting, and gregarious. Qualities that made Steller's sea cow one of the most vulnerable creatures imaginable upon encountering humans armed with spears. Sirenians are the order of marine mammals that includes manatees and dugongs, slow, aquatic herbivores that graze on submerged vegetation like sea cows. Hydrodamalis gigas took that body plan to the extreme. An animal the length of a city bus, with thick dark skin like oak bark, short forelimbs, and no bifurcated tail fluke like cetaceans. The tail ended in a horizontal crescent shape. It had no teeth. It ground algae with rough, horny plates inside its mouth, like crushing fibrous vegetation between two overlapping sheets of sandpaper. It lived exclusively in the shallow coastal waters of the Commander Islands, at the far western end of the North Pacific. The naturalist George Wilhelm Steller was the first European to describe the species in detail, during the months that Bering's expedition spent stranded on the island that now bears the commander's name. Steller survived the shipwreck, observed the animals up close, and recorded behaviors that no scientist would ever document again. He described groups of sea cows grazing on shallow kelp so close to shore that they could be reached on foot at low tide. He noted that the animals showed no flight response when humans approached. They had never learned they needed to run. He estimated populations of a few thousand individuals on the islands, a number that was already a fraction of what had likely existed before contact with native Siberian populations. The meat was described as flavorful and plentiful. A single adult provided enough fat and protein to supply a crew for weeks. The subcutaneous fat was thick, insulation against the cold waters of the North Pacific, and rendered into a clear, mild-tasting oil. Fur traders operating in the region quickly discovered that the Commander Islands offered not only sea otter pelts, but also an incredibly easy and fresh source of provisions. Organized groups began using the islands as a resupply stop, systematically killing sea cows at every layover. The process required no sophistication, just a spear and the strength to strike an animal that didn't move away. The species' gregariousness accelerated the collapse. Steller documented that when one individual was injured, others in the group would approach. They tried to push the wounded animal away from shore, shielded it with their own bodies, and stayed close even while being attacked themselves. This altruistic behavior, which had likely evolved against predators incapable of killing entire groups at once, became fatal in the face of human hunters. Killing one animal drew the others in. Rather than dispersing the population, each kill concentrated more targets at the same spot. The social behavior that had sustained individual survival became the vector of collective extinction. The inability to dive was an additional critical vulnerability. Hydrodamalis gigas surfaced frequently and grazed only in water so shallow that its back was often exposed above the surface. It could not escape into inaccessible depths. It could not swim at high speed over any distance. When pursued, its only response was to try to swim toward more open water, which kept it just as accessible to boats. An aquatic animal that cannot dive, cannot run, and does not fear humans is, in practice, just as vulnerable as a land animal that doesn't flee. The last Steller's sea cow was killed in 1768, 27 years after Steller recorded the species. That interval is remarkably short for the extinction of a large-bodied animal. Whales were hunted for centuries before collapsing. Seals persisted for decades under intense pressure. The speed of H. gigas' disappearance reflects a combination of factors rarely so extreme all at once. An already small and geographically restricted population, a complete absence of flight behavior, ease of hunting, and immediate economic value that motivated continuous extraction with no recovery interval whatsoever. Any one of those factors alone would have been serious. Combined, they were lethal in under 3 decades. Fossils of Hydrodamalis gigas have been found all along the North Pacific coast, from Japan to Baja California. The species had once been far more widely distributed. By the time Steller found it restricted to the Commander Islands, it was already a geographic relic. It had survived at that remote location probably because its isolation had protected it from the human pressure that had already eliminated mainland populations. The islands functioned as a last refuge until European expeditions discovered the refuge. The story of H. gigas is, in that sense, the story of many extinctions. The species did not vanish from the entire world all at once, but was erased region by region until the last remaining pocket was found and swept clean. Steller's record remains the only detailed study of the species in life. His notes describe behavior, anatomy, diet, social interactions, and skin characteristics with enough precision to allow scientific reconstruction centuries later. Ironically, Steller was a member of the same expedition whose survivors initiated the hunting that would lead to extinction. He died in 1746 before seeing the outcome, but left behind the only first-hand account of what the world looked like with Steller's sea cows in it. Without that accident of documentation, the species would be known only from bones, with no window into the animal it actually was. Before modern extinctions, the oceans of the Cretaceous were swept by an event unmatched in scale. The Chicxulub asteroid impact, 66 million years ago. Among those wiped out was Styxosaurus, an elasmosaurid, an extremely long-necked variant of the plesiosaurs. It reached about 12 meters in total length, roughly half of which was its neck, a structure that allowed the animal to approach schools of fish slowly while its body stayed well back. The long, pointed teeth neither cut nor chewed. Styxosaurus swallowed fish whole. Its predators likely included the shark Cretoxorina and the giant mosasaur Tylosaurus. It inhabited the shallow Cretaceous seas that covered what is now the interior of North America, a continental body of water that disappeared along with Styxosaurus itself. Plesiosaurs were not dinosaurs. They were marine reptiles of a separate lineage, with 4 broad flippers that functioned like underwater wings. Picture an animal that flies through water rather than swimming with lateral body undulations. This mode of propulsion, called underwater flight, is the same used by penguins and sea turtles today. The body was compact and relatively rigid. All maneuvering depended on the 4 flippers working in coordination. The elasmosaurids, the subfamily to which Styxosaurus belonged, took that body plan to the opposite extreme. An extraordinarily long neck, small head, and teeth projecting forward like a cage. The neck of Styxosaurus contained more than 70 cervical vertebrae. For comparison, virtually every mammal, from the giraffe to the human, has exactly 7 neck vertebrae. That elongated structure was not rigid like a mast. It was flexible enough for wide lateral curves, but likely limited in sharp vertical movements. The hypothesis best supported by biomechanical studies is that the animal kept its body submerged at a certain depth while extending its neck laterally or obliquely into schools of small fish. The head would reach the school before the bulky body disturbed the surrounding water. The technique of a fisherman who advances the rod without making noise with his feet. The teeth of Styxosaurus were long, slightly curved, and projected outward from the jaw even with the mouth closed. They formed a cage when shut. That dental pattern is found in predators that capture slippery, fast-moving prey, preventing escape laterally after a strike. There was no crushing surface, no capacity to process large prey. Everything was swallowed whole. Gastroliths, stones deliberately swallowed, have been found in plesiosaur fossils and likely aided mechanical digestion in the stomach, functioning as an internal mill to break down whole prey. The Cretaceous Interior Sea, known as the Western Interior Seaway, was a shallow marine extension that split what is now North America from north to south, from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. Depths ranged from dozens to a few hundred meters. Temperatures were tropical to subtropical, and marine life was extraordinarily rich. In that environment, Styxosaurus was not the largest predator. It was a specialist in small to medium prey, occupying a distinct niche from the large mosasaurs and sharks that dominated the upper tiers of the food chain. Styxosaurus fossils have been found primarily in Kansas and South Dakota. Today, continental plains, more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest ocean. Cretoxorhina mantelli, the Ginsu shark of the Cretaceous, was one of the top predators of that same sea. It reached 6 to 7 meters, with smooth, sharp teeth designed for slicing large prey. Fossils of Cretoxorhina have been found with bite marks on mosasaur and plesiosaur bones, indicating that large marine reptiles were on the menu. Tylosaurus, the largest mosasaur of the interior sea, reached 12 to 15 meters and likely hunted anything that fit in its jaws. Styxosaurus, despite its total length of 12 meters, had a small head and a comparatively fragile body, vulnerable to predators that targeted the trunk. The Chicxulub impact, an asteroid roughly 10 kilometers in diameter that struck the Mexican platform, released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs in a fraction of a second. The impact itself was localized. The ecological collapse was global. The debris cloud blocked sunlight for months or years, shutting down photosynthesis at the base of every food chain. Marine phytoplankton, the organisms that sustain, directly or indirectly, all oceanic life, collapsed. Without phytoplankton, the zooplankton that depended on it collapsed. Without zooplankton, the small fish that made up Styxosaurus' diet collapsed. The specialized predator starved before any direct effect of the impact even reached it. Styxosaurus' dietary specialization in small fish, which had been an evolutionary advantage for millions of years in productive seas, became a death sentence in a bottom-up collapse of the food chain. More generalist predators, capable of eating whatever was available, had slightly better chances of surviving the first years of scarcity. Styxosaurus had no such flexibility. Its anatomy, dentition, and behavior were optimized for a specific type of prey in a specific type of environment. When the environment and the prey vanished, the predator had no alternative. Styxosaurus fossils are relatively well documented for a Cretaceous marine reptile. Multiple specimens allow detailed reconstructions of body proportions and flipper posture. What paleontology cannot recover is behavior. How the animal actually hunted, whether it was solitary or gregarious, whether it showed parental care, how long it lived. Comparisons with living reptiles suggest that plesiosaurs were likely viviparous, giving birth to live young rather than laying eggs, which would make incubating eggs in the open ocean impractical. But that remains a hypothesis based on indirect evidence, not direct fossil confirmation. In the same extinction event that wiped out Styxosaurus, Mosasaurus hoffmanii, the largest known mosasaur, ceased to exist. Extinct as a result of the KPG event at the end of the Cretaceous, approximately 66 million years ago, the mosasaur breathed air, was a powerful swimmer, and was well adapted to living in the shallow, warm interior seas that predominated in the late Cretaceous. The largest Mosasaurus hoffmanii reached lengths of around 17 meters. It was one of the largest marine animals of its time and likely an apex predator. Its diet included fish, sharks, cephalopods, ammonites, sea turtles, and other marine reptiles. The first known fossil was found in a limestone quarry in Maastricht, in the Netherlands, in 1764, and was mistaken for whale bones, then crocodile bones, before being correctly identified as a reptile. Mosasaurs were neither dinosaurs nor plesiosaurs. They belonged to a separate lineage of lizards that returned to the sea. The closest living relative is the Komodo dragon and snakes, not crocodiles or sharks. That means Mosasaurus hoffmanii was, fundamentally, a giant lizard adapted to marine life. Scaly skin, jaws articulated similarly to serpents for swallowing bulky prey, and a forked tongue likely used to detect chemicals in the water. The transition from terrestrial lizard to 17-meter ocean predator took place over millions of years of selection in an environment that rewarded size, speed, and the ability to take down large prey. The propulsion of Mosasaurus hoffmanii came primarily from its tail, long, muscular, laterally flattened into a vertical keel like a giant eel. The four flippers stabilized and steered, but were not the primary engine. This undulatory swimming mode with a powerful tail is different from the underwater flight of plesiosaurs and more similar to how modern crocodiles swim at speed. It allowed explosive acceleration for prey capture, the kind of swimming of an ambush or short pursuit predator, not a long-distance migrator. Maximum speed estimates run at a few meters per second, enough to outpace any prey in the Cretaceous. The jaw of Mosasaurus hoffmanii had a notable feature, an additional joint in the middle of the lower tooth-bearing bone, the intramandibular joint, which allowed the two halves of the lower jaw to flex slightly outward. This mechanism, present in modern snakes, increases the effective width of the mouth when swallowing large prey. The teeth were conical, robust, and slightly recurved, designed to grip and pierce, not cut. Prey was immobilized and swallowed whole, or in large pieces. Mosasaur tooth marks found on ammonite, turtle, and other marine reptile fossils document a wide-ranging diet with no rigid preference for prey size or type. Ammonites, spiral-shelled cephalopod mollusks, also extinct in the KPG event, were extraordinarily abundant in Cretaceous seas and certainly featured in the diet. Ammonite shells with circular perforations consistent with mosasaur teeth have been found at multiple sites. Cretaceous sea turtles, some reaching larger sizes than modern ones, were occasional prey. Bite marks on fossil shells indicate that Mosasaurus was capable of breaking through rigid structures when needed. Cretaceous sharks, including Cretoxorhina, likely avoided confrontation with large adult Mosasaurus hoffmanii, and the reverse was probably also true, making the interaction between the two a matter of relative size and context. The fossil found in Maastricht in 1764 became the subject of scientific debate for decades. The city of Maastricht sat atop late Cretaceous limestone deposits. The Maastrichtian stratigraphic stage takes its name from that very locality. The enormous skull was initially described as belonging to a whale, then to a giant crocodile. In 1799, Dutch anatomist Adriaan Kamper correctly identified its reptilian characteristics. In 1822, the name Mosasaurus, lizard of the Meuse, the river running through Maastricht, was formally proposed. The original specimen was seized by Napoleonic troops and today sits in the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, where it remains one of the most important fossils in the history of paleontology. The correct identification of Mosasaurus as an extinct marine reptile was one of the first cases in which science formally recognized that species had existed in the past with no living equivalent. In 1799, the concept of extinction was still controversial. Part of the scientific community resisted the conclusion that God would have allowed the disappearance of created creatures. The Maastricht skull was too large, too strange, and too different from any known animal to be ignored. It forced a confrontation with the reality of extinction decades before the concept was widely accepted, contributing to the development of paleontology as an independent scientific discipline. Mosasaurus hoffmanii was at the peak of its ecological dominance at the moment of the Chicxulub impact. There were no predators capable of threatening it. It had diversified into multiple niches through the various species of the genus. Mosasaur lineages as a whole were the most successful group of marine reptiles of the late Cretaceous. That success offered no protection against global ecological collapse. Being the dominant predator in a collapsing ecosystem is a dead end. The larger and more specialized the predator, the greater its dependence on complex food chains that stop functioning when the base disappears. The collapse of oceanic productivity following the impact has been chemically documented in geological strata around the world. The KPG line, the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, is identifiable in sedimentary rocks by a spike of iridium, an element rare in Earth's crust but abundant in asteroids, and by an abrupt break in fossil diversity. Below the line, rich and complex ecosystems. Above it, biotic poverty followed by slow recovery over millions of years. Mosasaurus hoffmanii exists only below that line. There is no record of any specimen that survived the event. Modern computational reconstructions, based on biomechanical models derived from living relatives, suggest that Mosasaurus hoffmanii was likely partially warm-blooded, a higher metabolism than modern ectothermic reptiles, but different from the full homeothermy of mammals and birds. This is inferred from the geographic distribution of fossils, which reach relatively high latitudes, and from the probable growth rate indicated by bone structure. A purely ectothermic 17-meter reptile in cold water would be implausible. A large, active predator requires a metabolism capable of sustaining continuous activity. The Cretaceous sea that sustained it no longer exists, and with it went the only context in which such an animal was even possible. 55 million years before the KPG event, the Jurassic seas of Europe were dominated by another reptile, Liopleurodon ferox, a pliosaurid with a short neck, large skull, and 4 powerful flippers. The two species of Liopleurodon lived from the Colovian to the Kimmeridgian of the Jurassic period, approximately 166 to 155 million years ago. It was the apex predator of the Middle to Late Jurassic seas that covered Europe. Studies on its nostrils concluded that Liopleurodon could likely track its aquatic environment by smell to locate the source of certain odors. Its actual size was underestimated and overestimated for decades. The various specimens attributed to the species show that the animal reached between 5 and 7 meters in length, with some researchers estimating a maximum length of approximately 10 meters. Pliosaurids and elasmosaurids, like Styxosaurus, were both plesiosaurs, but with inverse proportions. While elasmosaurids had enormously long necks and small heads, pliosaurids had short necks and disproportionately large skulls. Liopleurodon represented this second model, a skull that could reach 1/5 or more of the animal's total body length, wide jaws armed with robust conical teeth, and a neck muscular enough to transmit the force of a high-speed bite. Picture concentrating all the offensive power of a predator into a head the size of another entire animal. That was the pliosaurid body plan. The name Liopleurodon means smooth-sided teeth, a reference to the surface of the tooth crowns, which lack the serrations found on the teeth of many other Mesozoic predators. Smooth, conical teeth are efficient for piercing and gripping slippery prey. Serrated teeth are better for cutting through tough tissue. The morphology suggests that Liopleurodon captured relatively whole prey, large fish, cephalopods, smaller marine reptiles, and swallowed them with minimal processing. The absence of serration indicates it did not rely on cutting chunks off prey larger than itself, unlike predators such as modern sharks that attack cetaceans. The olfactory system of Liopleurodon is unusually well documented for an extinct reptile. The nostrils were paired and positioned in a way that allowed directional water flow. Water entered through the front nasal opening and exited through the rear as the animal swam, creating a continuous current over the olfactory epithelium. This arrangement, identified through morphological analysis of fossil nasal canals, suggests the ability to detect chemical concentration gradients in the water, to sense which direction a smell was coming from, not just that it was present. For an ambush predator in seas with limited visibility, locating prey by water chemistry would have been a decisive advantage in conditions where vision falls short. The locomotion of pliosaurids generated considerable scientific debate. Hydrostatic models indicate that 4 large flippers, beating in alternating or synchronized patterns, produce substantial thrust and good maneuverability at low speeds, but are less efficient for sustained high speeds compared to the caudal propulsion of mosasaurs and ichthyosaurs. Liopleurodon was probably not the fastest swimmer in the Jurassic seas, but it was highly maneuverable, capable of quick turns in tight spaces, explosive acceleration from rest, and precise 3-dimensional adjustments within the water column. That hydrodynamic profile is consistent with an ambush strategy. Wait motionless, approach slowly, strike with explosive acceleration. The Middle and Late Jurassic seas that covered Europe were shallow, warm, and biologically lush. Present-day Europe was then an archipelago of islands at subtropical latitude. What is now solid land was covered by shallow sea with a chalky mud bottom. In that environment, horizontal visibility could be limited by turbidity and suspended organic matter. Ambush predators thrive in low-visibility environments where prey cannot detect them far enough in advance to escape. The coloration and behavior of Liopleurodon are unknown, but the morphology and environment are consistent with a predator that waited motionless and struck by surprise. The history of Liopleurodon's estimated size is a textbook example of how paleontological estimates can be skewed by fragmentary specimens and speculative enthusiasm. In the 1990s, unpublished estimates and popular accounts attributed lengths of 25 meters to the animal, figures that circulated widely in the media. Rigorous analysis of known specimens, published in the following decades, established 5 to 7 meters as a well-supported range, with a possible maximum of around 10 meters. It is still a formidable predator, but the difference between 7 and 25 meters is the difference between an animal the size of an orca and a sea monster with no biological parallel. Paleontology corrected the exaggeration. Popular perception took longer to catch up. Liopleurodon coexisted with other Jurassic marine predators, including ichthyosaurs of various sizes, marine crocodiles, and sharks. Within the ecosystem, it likely occupied the niche of the bulkiest predator in the intermediate to upper water column, with no competitor of equivalent size in the European Middle and Late Jurassic seas. The European fossil record of large pliosaurids is rich enough to trace their temporal and geographic distribution. Specimens are concentrated in formations from England, France, and Germany, associated with shallow marine facies of Colovian to Kimmeridgian age, gradually disappearing before the end of the Jurassic, possibly due to shifts in European marine environments. The extinction of Liopleurodon was not catastrophic like that of Mosasaurus. There was no asteroid. The European Jurassic pliosaurids declined over millions of years as the shallow seas they inhabited retreated and environmental conditions changed at the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary. Other pliosaurids, such as Pliosaurus and Kronosaurus, continued into the Cretaceous, but as distinct lineages. Liopleurodon specifically disappeared with the environment that had sustained it. Not a sudden collapse, but the gradual disappearance of a specific ecosystem that had made that predator, in that form, possible. The ocean changed. The animal could not change with it. Before the plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, a group of marine reptiles dominated the oceans with a body plan convergent with that of modern dolphins, the ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs were particularly abundant in the late Triassic and early Jurassic, until they were replaced as the dominant aquatic predators by plesiosaurs, and their diversity declined due to the environmental instability caused by climatic upheavals in the late Cretaceous, going extinct approximately 94 million years ago. They appeared on Earth around 250 million years ago and died out around 90 million years ago. well before the non-avian dinosaurs. Deep-diving ichthyosaurs could descend to 600 meters. Some of the largest specimens, such as the recently described Ichthyodon severensis, were estimated at over 25 meters in length, rivaling the largest known whales, and existed up to the Triassic boundary 201 million years ago. Ichthyosaurs were neither plesiosaurs nor mosasaurs. They were an independent lineage of reptiles that returned to the sea in the Triassic, likely from terrestrial ancestors not yet identified with certainty. The result of millions of years of selection in an aquatic environment was a body plan remarkably similar to that of modern dolphins and tunas. A streamlined body, triangular dorsal fin, a forked tail with horizontal lobes in cetaceans, but vertical ones in ichthyosaurs, and forelimbs transformed into rigid flippers for stabilization. This evolutionary convergence, similar forms arising in unrelated lineages subjected to the same environmental pressures, is one of the most frequently cited examples of how the environment sculpts morphology independently of ancestry. The eyes of some ichthyosaurs were the largest ever recorded in any vertebrate. Temnodontosaurus, from the early Jurassic, had eyes with a scleral diameter of up to 26 centimeters, larger than any documented vertebrate eye, including whales. Large eyes collect more light, enabling functional vision at depths where solar illumination is minimal or absent. The scleral ring, a ring of bones inside the eye that is preserved in fossils, indicates precise size and provides clues about behavior. Very large eyes relative to the skull suggest animals active at night or in deep water. For ichthyosaurs, exceptional eyes were likely an adaptation for hunting at low depths at night or during daytime dives below the photic zone. Dives to 600 meters are inferred from structural analysis of bones and overall body morphology. Deep divers face increasing pressure that collapses unadapted lungs and forces nitrogen into the bloodstream, the same problem that causes decompression sickness in human divers. Modern cetaceans that perform deep dives, such as sperm whales, have adaptations including a collapsible rib cage, elevated myoglobin in their muscles to store oxygen, and the ability to reduce metabolism during a dive. Analysis of the bone structure of deep-diving ichthyosaurs reveals patterns consistent with similar adaptations. Bone organization suggesting thoracic flexibility and high myoglobin density in preserved muscle tissue. Ichthyodon severensis, formally described in 2024 from fossils found in the United Kingdom, represents the upper size limit of ichthyosaurs, estimated at over 25 meters based on fragments of vertebrae and flipper bones of extraordinary proportions. For context, the blue whale, the largest animal in the history of life on Earth, reaches 30 meters. A 25-meter marine reptile in the late Triassic, 201 million years ago, shows that ocean ecosystems sustaining megafauna on a scale comparable to the largest whales existed long before cetaceans. The ocean as an environment permits gigantism in ways that land rarely can, and evolution reached that limit in completely distinct lineages, separated by hundreds of millions of years. The decline of ichthyosaurs was gradual and associated with environmental disturbances of the Middle Cretaceous. Changes in sea levels, variations in ocean temperature, and anoxic events that periodically stripped parts of the ocean of dissolved oxygen, collapsing local productivity. Unlike the abrupt extinction caused by Chicxulub at the end of the Cretaceous, the disappearance of ichthyosaurs around 94 million years ago was a process of gradual erosion. Diversity falling over millions of years, lineages vanishing one by one until none survived. There was no single moment of extinction. There was a prolonged process of replacement and depletion that ended without survivors. The extinction of ichthyosaurs coincides roughly with the expansion of plesiosaurs and the appearance of the first mosasaurs. For decades, the debate centered on whether that replacement was causal. plesiosaurs directly competing with ichthyosaurs and displacing them, or merely coincidental, with both groups independently responding to the same environmental pressures? The current view, based on detailed analysis of the fossil record, favors the environmental explanation. Ichthyosaurs were already in decline for ecological reasons before plesiosaurs diversified into the niches they occupied. They were not driven out by competitors. They simply did not survive instabilities that other groups tolerated better. Ichthyosaur fossils preserved with soft tissue outlines, exceptional finds in fine-grained shale that captured impressions of skin, confirmed the dorsal fin and lower tail lobe, structures that do not fossilize under normal conditions. These specimens, primarily Stenopterygius from the Jurassic of Germany, also show evidence of smooth skin without visible scales and dark dorsal coloration, possibly countershading, where a dark back seen from above blends with the depths and a light belly seen from below blends with the illuminated surface. This coloration pattern exists in dolphins, sharks, and modern tunas for the same reason. Bidirectional camouflage in an environment where threats and prey can come from any direction. The ichthyosaur lineage lasted 160 million years, far longer than any group of marine mammals. They appeared in the Triassic, flourished in the Jurassic, declined in the Cretaceous, and disappeared before the Chicxulub impact. Throughout that time, they diversified into dozens of genera occupying niches that are filled today by dolphins, orcas, sperm whales, and pilot whales. When cetaceans began colonizing the ocean 30 million years after the ichthyosaur's extinction, they found niches that had been empty long enough to be reoccupied from scratch, and converged on the same forms, through the same process of selection, producing visually similar animals from completely different ancestors. After the extinction of the great marine reptiles, mammals filled the upper ocean niches. Basilosaurus, whose name means king lizard, having initially been mistaken for a giant reptile, was one of the first fully aquatic cetaceans. It was a genus of extinct primitive whales from the family Basilosauridae, found in Middle and Late Eocene rocks in North America and North Africa. It reached a length of about 21 meters, with the skull alone measuring up to 1.5 meters. The fossil record of Basilosaurus ends around 35 to 33.9 million years ago, coinciding with the Eocene-Oligocene extinction event, which also resulted in the extinction of nearly all other Archaeocetes. Unlike modern whales, which swallow prey whole, Basilosaurus had differentiated teeth, canines and molars, and chewed its food. Bite marks found on fossils of the smaller contemporary cetacean Dorodon indicate that it was Basilosaurus' primary food source. Cetaceans descended from terrestrial ungulate mammals, the group that includes hippos, pigs, and deer. The common ancestor of whales and hippos lived about 53 million years ago. In geological terms, the transition from a land mammal to a fully aquatic 21-meter Basilosaurus happened in under 15 million years. Remarkable evolutionary speed for such a radical physical transformation. The earliest known cetaceans, such as Pakicetus, still had 4 functional limbs and likely lived in estuaries and shallow rivers. Basilosaurus, several million years later, was already fully pelagic, incapable of supporting its own weight on land, living and dying in the ocean. The body of Basilosaurus was unusual even among primitive cetaceans, extremely elongated and serpentine, with proportions more like a giant eel than a modern whale. Current estimates suggest that the 21-meter length was composed largely of an elongated trunk and tail, not a bulky head. Vestigial hind limbs, small pelvic and femur bones completely disconnected from the spine and serving no locomotor function, were present, direct evidence of terrestrial ancestry. These residual limbs were likely used as guides during copulation, not for swimming or standing on land. The dentition of Basilosaurus is one of its most distinctive features compared to modern whales. Front teeth were conical and pointed, suitable for gripping. Rear teeth were triangular with multiple cusps, suitable for crushing. This dental differentiation, called heterodonty, exists in virtually all terrestrial mammals, but was lost in modern whales, which either developed uniform dentition or lost it entirely in favor of filter-feeding baleen. Basilosaurus chewed its prey into pieces before swallowing, a behavior documented by the cut and crush marks on Dorudon bones found in association with Basilosaurus fossils in Egypt and Alabama. Dorudon atrox, fierce tooth, was a contemporary cetacean of much smaller size, between 4 and 5 meters. Fossils of juvenile Dorudon skulls found in Egypt's Zeuglodon Formation display punctures and compression marks consistent with the teeth of adult Basilosaurus. Predation on calves is the inferred pattern. Adult Dorudon were likely too large or too agile to be routinely captured, but calves in nursery areas, which geographically overlapped with locations where Basilosaurus was also abundant, would have been accessible prey. This implies that Basilosaurus frequented Dorudon calving grounds as a seasonal resource, behavior documented in modern orcas that visit sea lion colonies during birthing seasons. The Tethys Ocean, the body of water that occupied the space between the separating continents during the Eocene, was the central habitat of Basilosaurus. Warm, rich in nutrients from the surrounding continents, this interior sea provided the conditions for a diverse primitive cetacean fauna. Basilosaurus fossils have been found in Alabama, Louisiana, Egypt, Jordan, and Pakistan, a distribution that roughly maps the margins of the Tethys in the Middle and Late Eocene. The gradual retreat of that ocean, as continents drew closer and the equatorial corridor closed, was one of the environmental factors associated with the decline of Archaeocetes at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary. The Eocene-Oligocene extinction event, around 34 million years ago, was caused by abrupt global cooling. The formation of the Antarctic ice sheet disrupted equatorial ocean currents and drastically reduced the average temperature of the oceans. That cooling altered the distribution of marine productivity, eliminating the shallow, warm seas that sustained the Archaeocetes. Basilosaurus and its relatives disappeared. The lineages that survived were the ancestors of modern whales, smaller, more adaptable forms that tolerated colder water and more variable conditions. The extinction of Basilosaurus was not the end of cetaceans. It was the replacement of a specific evolutionary solution for the warm Eocene ocean by more flexible solutions suited to the colder Oligocene ocean. The discovery of Basilosaurus in the early 19th century generated systematic confusion. The first bones found in Alabama in 1832 were described as a reptile by Richard Harlan, who proposed the name Basilosaurus, king lizard. Richard Owen, the anatomist who would later coin the term dinosaur, demonstrated in 1839 that the bones were mammalian, not reptilian, and proposed renaming the animal Zeuglodon, belt tooth. Under the rules of biological nomenclature, the older name takes priority. Basilosaurus remained the valid name despite being anatomically misleading. The animal is officially a lizard that is not a lizard, a nomenclatural quirk that survived scientific correction because naming rules prioritize stability over descriptive accuracy. The 1.5-meter skull of Basilosaurus housed a relatively small brain for its body size. Modern whales have brain-to-body ratios among the highest of any mammal, associated with complex social behavior, elaborate communication, and learning. Basilosaurus likely lacked the cognitive capabilities of modern cetaceans. It was a powerful predator, but probably solitary and relatively simple in behavior. The cognitive complexity of today's whales was built over tens of millions of years of subsequent evolution, not inherited from the Archaeocetes. Just as the body form of ichthyosaurs converged with that of dolphins, The size of Basilosaurus converged with that of great whales, but convergence in form does not imply convergence in neural function. From the Urolophus javanicus bought at a Jakarta market in 1862 to the Basilosaurus that ruled the Tethys Ocean 40 million years ago, the extinction of marine species spans the full scale of geological time. Ichthyosaurs existed for 160 million years before disappearing 94 million years ago. Liopleurodon ambush hunted in the Jurassic seas of Europe for at least 10 million years. Styxosaurus and Mosasaurus were swept away in geological seconds by the Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago. Basilosaurus survived 7 million years before disappearing at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary. Steller's sea cow lasted 27 years after contact with armed Europeans. The Caribbean monk seal held on for 4.5 centuries of hunting before vanishing in 1952. The Japanese sea lion was driven extinct before it was ever understood. And the Java stingaree existed, to science, as a single 33-centimeter specimen, bought at a market stall, never seen again, declared extinct 161 years later. The ocean has a long memory. Layers of sedimentary rock preserve records of marine communities that existed for tens of millions of years and then disappeared, sometimes abruptly, sometimes through gradual erosion across entire eras. Each layer tells a different story. Here, the peak diversity of ammonites. There, the sudden absence of anything above a certain size after the KPG line. Higher up, the slow emergence of new forms filling the empty niches. Reading that record is learning that extinction is not the exception in the history of life. It is the inevitable fate of every lineage, across timescales ranging from decades to hundreds of millions of years. The structural difference between extinctions caused by asteroid impacts and those caused by human activity lies not in their irreversibility. Both are permanent, but in their speed and cause. Mosasaurus and Styxosaurus disappeared because a 10-kilometer object altered the global climate in a matter of years. There was no intent, no alternative, no mechanism for prevention. Hydrodamalis gigas disappeared because it was large, tasty, slow, and easy to kill, and because no regulatory structure existed to limit exploitation before collapse. The second extinction was preventable, the first was not. That distinction matters not as historical judgment, but as practical information about what can still be prevented going forward. The gap between scientific discovery and extinction varies enormously among the species in this narrative. Ichthyodonton severensis was formally described in 2024, 201 million years after its extinction. Liopleurodon was named in 1873, 155 million years after it disappeared. Basilosaurus was described in 1834 and had already been extinct for 34 million years. Urolophus javanicus was described in 1862 and was probably already extinct by then. In every case of modern extinction, the pattern repeats. Science arrives late, describes what remains, and certifies the disappearance of what it could not protect. The fossil record is, in large part, the inventory of what science found after it was already over. The 5 modern animals in this narrative, the Java stingaree, the Japanese sea lion, the Caribbean monk seal, Steller's sea cow, and implicitly, the at-risk species that will follow them, share a set of vulnerabilities that paleontologists would recognize as risk factors in any era. Small, geographically restricted populations, low fecundity, no anti-predator behavior toward humans, immediate economic value, and ease of extraction. None of these factors are evolutionary novelties. They are the same characteristics that made certain species more vulnerable to environmental variation in every geological age. What was new was the human capacity to intensify pressure at speeds no natural variation had ever reached before. The ocean today contains species carrying similar combinations of vulnerabilities. slow-growing, late-maturing sharks. Low-density coastal dugongs. Vaquitas, the world's smallest cetacean, restricted to the northern Gulf of California, with fewer than 10 confirmed individuals. For these species, the window between recognition of risk and confirmed extinction is measured in years, not decades. The difference between Urolophus javanicus, declared extinct 161 years after it was collected, and a vaquita documented on video today and extinct by 2030, is only the speed of certification. The collapse process is the same. The circular narrative connecting a Jakarta fish market in 1862 to the Jurassic seas is not a metaphor. It is a factual sequence. The same forces that determined which species survived each major disruption — population size, ecological flexibility, geographic distribution, reproductive rate — are still operating. The asteroid has been replaced by the bottom trawl. The Eocene-Oligocene cooling has been replaced by anthropogenic warming. The timescale has compressed from millions of years to decades. The mechanism, however, is analogous. Environmental disruption intense enough to outpace the response capacity of specialized species, followed by the extinction of the least flexible forms and the survival of the most adaptable. What sets the present moment apart from all previous ones is not extinction itself, which has always occurred, but the theoretical possibility of conscious intervention. No natural process prior to the emergence of technological civilizations included the option of knowing the trajectory of a collapsing species and deliberately changing it. That knowledge exists now, for vaquitas, for dugongs, for deep-water sharks, and for dozens of marine species whose populations are documented in decline. What is done with that knowledge, whether it translates into sufficient action or remains as the record of what was known while the process continued, is the question that connects the Berlin specimen to the ocean of today. The ray bought at a Jakarta market in July 1862 was measured, drawn, catalogued, and placed in a museum drawer. It sat there while the Java Sea was fished out, while Zalophus japonicus disappeared from the Korean coast, while the last Caribbean monk seal swam around Saranilla Bank in 1952, while the last Steller's sea cow was killed in 1768, while the Chicxulub impact was reconstructed in increasing detail, while Ichthyodon severensis was described from fragments found in Somerset. The specimen remains in the drawer. The Java Sea is still being fished. The narrative does not end, it simply continues, with different characters, in the same ocean.